Bonjour, Annie. Hello. I'm Andréane Chénier, the NDP candidate for Nickel Belt. I want to start by saying thank you to Rethink Green, the Citizens Climate Lobby of Greater Sudbury, and Green PAC for the important work that you do. It feels like the world is on fire, and I think we need to act right now. And I also want to start by acknowledging the Robinson-Huron Treaty and the traditional territories of the Atikameksheng, Anishinaabeg, and the Wanapitei First Nations. I am committed to truth and reconciliation. Our party is devoted to ensuring that Canada can move forward into a future that sees the environment and our communities working together. Jack Layton was a pioneer in the climate action. Under his leadership, we brought in the Climate Change Accountability Act in 2007. Had it been adopted then, we would have already enshrined into law with science-based targets of reducing greenhouse gases to 80% below the 1990 levels by 2050. We're already seeing the effects of uncontrolled emissions. There's climate emergencies everywhere. We're seeing flooding, tornadoes, and heat domes, and we can't afford to have Canada continue to contribute to these tragedies that displace people, that create humanitarian problems across the globe. So I want to ensure that climate action is kept at the forefront of any bill that gets considered. Putting an environmental lens on budgets, infrastructure projects, or any other federal endeavor will help to ensure that we're always moving forward on our targets and will remove silos that might exist. This is not a single ministry problem. It's a pervasive problem that requires the full engagement of government.
Thank you, Andréane. And I believe you were on the earlier session, so we're going to follow the similar format that we've been following, where we've got 3 questions pertaining to specific policies. Pardon me. So the first one is C12, and then we've got a slide about your policy, then a couple of audience questions. So as mentioned earlier, we know that C12 is about Canadian Net Zero's Emission Accountability Act. And if we go to the next slide, there are 3 questions that are asking you to kind of drill down a little bit deeper into this policy. So 1, defend how your party voted on this bill. Secondly, how you would have voted. And then thirdly, how you could possibly have made this policy better if you could.
Okay. It's not a secret that New Democrats are committed to climate action. They've stated already our targets would have already been in law in 2007. When it comes to how our party voted on this bill, well, our party voted, first off, what we did was to start by working with the sitting government to make sure that that there were necessary improvements that were made into this bill, because one of the things that we absolutely must have is accountability measures. We can't just say that we're going to put something in that's going to be set, in 2050 and not check in on a regular basis to ensure that we are in fact still on track. Because if we wait until 2050, we already know that would be way too late. How our party then voted, we voted in favor of, after our improvements strengthened the bill, we then supported that so that it could become into law. How would I have made this policy better? I think that for me, it's really about ensuring that we have very concrete, very discrete accountability targets, but also that we're always continuously consulting, not just with the government, but also without government, to make sure that we're always responsive to the needs and to the impacts of the things that we're doing. And so that would be how I would be ensuring that the bill would be better. And when I go to government, that is going to be, I'll be working to ensure that we're not ignoring, that we're actually consistently on track.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to ask the same 3 questions then about C15. And so we can advance to the next slide. So we know that C15 is about enshrining the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People under national law. And we have the same 3 questions pertaining to Bill C15.
Okay. Absolutely, we support truth and reconciliation. I mean, Bill C15 is the second version of this particular this bill. The first one was brought in by the NDP MP Romeo Saganash, and so we're happy. We're so happy that it was finally put into law. We are in fact committed to meaningful truth and reconciliation. And that what that means is that we don't necessarily want just a declaration. What we want is to actually see it implemented. And in order for things to be implemented, what we have to see is meaningful budgets, not just promised dollars. Because in previous governments, there were lots of promised dollars, but not many of them were actually spent to do the work of that is necessary to ensure that the rights of our Indigenous sisters, brothers, or Two-Spirited are in fact considered, and that we are working meaningfully towards it. So, and this collaboration between from nation to nation is so critical to our ability to move forward on climate action, because Indigenous peoples have been stewards of this land for so long, and they have valuable historical and traditional knowledge that is passed down that can be leveraged, and they can then be put into action for meaningful climate action. How would I have made this policy better? Ensuring that when we were really meaningfully putting steps, and that again, same thing, when we're implementing, when we're putting dollars forward, that we're actually checking in with the nations that we want, nation to nation, so that we're ensuring that we're not creating more harm than good.
Thank you, Andréane. We'll go to the next slide, please. So the next set of questions then are drilling down a little bit around C230, which is the National Strategy to Redress Environmental Racism Act. And if we go ahead and jump to the next slide, we'll see that we have those three questions where we dig into this policy a bit.
Okay, well, New Democrats voted in favor of this bill. I would have voted in favor of this bill as well. And the same goes for, sorry, for C12. I'm not sure if I said that, but I would have definitely voted in favor. I think for me, when I look at this, what this particular bill means, it means that we are working with Indigenous communities. That's because that's critical to success. We already know that climate emergencies, they target, or they not necessarily that they target, sorry, they impact people differently depending on where they are, and depending also on their socioeconomic station in life. I mean, we're just looking at traveling heat domes out in BC that caused a record number of deaths, and more specifically, looking at people who didn't have access to air conditioning. So, I mean, just in the Nickel Belt, that's a lot of our say, for example, there's a lot of seniors who don't have these, who don't have air conditioning, and that makes them much more vulnerable to the impacts of very high heat. There's also a lot of other vulnerable populations that just that particular piece would impact. Then there's the droughts that impacted our agricultural sector, and the number of people that were displaced by the forest fires. Like we can't just wait and not act. I mean, no, like just the fact that they were happening elsewhere in the province that weren't necessarily in my community where I was, doesn't mean that we were untouched by it. I have a small farm at my house, and the smoke from the forest fires that was traveling down from the north actually impacted all of the animals that I had on them. And that was not like, it's not like it, while it may seem far in terms of kilometers, it is not that far. We're really close. So from my perspective, I think that we need to continue to move forward, and we need to make sure that when we're addressing critical climate issues, that we need to still have that nation to nation discussion, but also consultation with different groups that are they're predisposed, not predisposed, wrong word, that are more affected by climate crisis across the world. So how would I have improved it? Well, just a little tiny snippet about me is that I'm a scientist by training. And so I believe in the value, not just of consultation, but of quantification and validation. So we can't just say that we're going to have these great ideas. Ideas are great because they give us a focus, they give us a target to go forward. But we also need to make sure that when we have programs that we're implementing them, that we're actually checking in to make sure that those programs are working. And that goes through to the consultation, quantitation, and validation, that we're constantly checking in, that we're constantly making sure that we are not, in our zeal to reopen the economy, say, for example, destroying valuable ecosystems that may be on indigenous lands just because they're commercially attractive. We can't continue to do that. And so we have to ensure that whatever it is that we're putting forward, that when we're considering environmental action or commercialization or development and or whatever, that we're also making sure that we're not creating impacts on populations that were not in the decision-making process. So that's how I would have improved it.
Thank you so much. Let's go ahead to the next question here, digs in on your particular climate policies. And so we've got a set of 4 kind of points here to address. What climate policy would you continue to champion, improve, or create? What would be the impact of this policy? Which experts and what evidence supports it? And then fourthly, will it encourage our global neighbors to cut their emissions too?
Okay. That's a great question. We have, okay, so one of the first things that I think is critical is that we need to stop this practice of just like subsidizing fossil fuels. So like we need to stop that. I mean, it's right now, it's $18 billion of tax dollars that we have that are being given to organizations or corporations that are just generating greenhouse gases or fossil fuels for us to burn, which contributes to the overall greenhouse gas burden. So first off, I think we need to stop that, like stop it and take those $18 billion and invest it into green technologies and environmental protection. And by using those dollars, what we'd be doing is that we would stop this practice of just setting these fossil fuels on fire. And overall, that would reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by about, like, if I remember correctly, about 40 megatons. So that's an important piece, because when we move away from using this kind of energy source, if we stop giving it, if we stop incentivizing it, if we stop giving it funds with which to operate, then we're saying basically you need to work on your own. And at the same time, we could be using these $18 billion to do cleanup of other, say, for example, I think in Alberta, there's like $1 billion worth of orphan wells that have just been left behind by these by exploration activities, and they've just been abandoned. Now it's on us. We can stop that from happening, and we can instead reinvest those dollars into other greener economies. Because I mean, like not greenhouse, good God, I'm having difficulty tonight. My apologies. It's been a long day. So we know that the green sector is one of the fastest growing sectors in Canada, like, and in Canada, we're leaders. So that kind of ties into another one of my priorities, which really moves to looking at greener sources of electricity. So we can't be looking at burning coal anymore. We can't be looking at fossil fuels. We need to be looking at different ways of powering our lives, and we all know that we do need that power. So that's fine. But moving away from removing the subsidies and basically investing in greener technologies such as electrification means that, like, there's a whole possibility that now opens up in terms of we can reimagine what transportation looks like. We could be energizing our homes in green ways so that we're not contributing overall to the burden. We could be making sure that businesses and larger industries are in fact moving towards using these greener sources of powers, which overall means that we would be removing greenhouse gases from the air. We'd be improving our air quality. My animals would be happier. And that overall would be reducing, like, just moving away from setting fossil fuels on fire for the purposes of moving things forward. That would help us, like, drop it by about 250 megatons. And we know that this is possible. We're already seeing electric vehicles on the streets. We're already seeing, industries. I think mining is doing a lot of work, in fact, to electrify itself instead of moving to gas, which is also a bonus for the workers who are not no longer being exposed to those kinds of emissions, because we also know that just setting greenhouse gases on fire causes some kinds of cancers. And another one, which is a bit closer to my heart, because I am we have a small farm in where I live, and what we're trying to do is incorporate green techniques into our farming. So what we do is our animals live in the environment that they were designed to be in. We have chickens live outside, our pigs live outside, they all live outside. And by doing that, we're also rebuilding the soil that our farm sits on, because our farm actually sits on property that was previously devastated. And so we're utilizing these kinds of techniques to actually rebuild the environment and add a lot more soil regeneration and fixing of carbon sources into the ground. To me, this also, like, moving towards those kinds of operations is also helps us from a food security perspective. I mean, we have the capacity to eat very well from food that is sourced locally. And so by removing the need to transport food from all over the world, we could be basically supporting businesses locally, and also providing ourselves with better quality nutrition. So it's not a huge amount of greenhouse gases that we might be sequestering in this way. I think it's somewhere around 60 megatons, but it would have not just a benefit to the environment, but would also have a benefit to the local economy, and also to ourselves with the better quality of food that we eat.
Okay, thank you so much. So we do have to shift into our 2 audience questions, and to keep the timing fair with everybody, we have about 2 minutes per per reply. So I think you've seen this question before, but it relates to the green space at Laurentian University and the Wolf Lake Old Growth Red Pine Forest, and basically saying, will you commit to protecting those green spaces? And if so, what actions will you take to do so?
Yes, I will commit to working tirelessly to make sure that we're protecting Wolf Lake, the old growth forest that surrounds it, and also the university green spaces. And I think that one of the ways that we could be doing this work is to prevent it from blocking it, basically from being sold off to commercial developers, making it a protected space. And I think that also what we need to be taking a good hard look at is why it is that these spaces are now on the chopping block, so to speak. And part of that comes from an underfunding of the university in which those lands are, and for Laurentian University green spaces and with Old Lake. So what I would see, in fact, is working to have good funding dedicated to ensure that we can do the work, and ensuring also that these spaces become protected areas, not just in part and parcel, but complete. Because if I understand it correctly, there is exploration right now that is being threatened in these spaces, and that should not be permitted. We can't continue to just devastate the environment for economic growth, because eventually we'll have no place left to go.
Thank you for staying on the 2-minute time limit. And
Trying.
Yeah, no, that was good. Thanks. We'll go to our next and final audience question here. And so this pertains to small businesses still suffering from the negative effects of the pandemic. And the question pertaining to that is, what would you do to help small businesses thrive in the low carbon economy?
Well, we have several different initiatives that would work here. In particular, one of the things that we're looking, because COVID saw a lot of people that were just put out of work because some businesses have closed, and in some cases permanently. But we also acknowledge that, being able to participate in a low carbon economy actually requires a certain skill set that people may or may not have. So part of our platform includes dedicating some funding to ensure that any student, and not just like the traditional student that we think about, that's somewhere about 18 going into either college or university, but really across across the age span, anyone who really wants to be able to reskill or requalify or retrain into those green sector jobs would be able to do so with well-funded public access to education. And so that's one of the ways that we would be doing that. In addition, because we are planning on our projects to stimulate the economy includes investment in infrastructure, but what we want to be doing is also focusing on purchasing Canadian-made products instead of getting things that come from the outside. So again, we'd be reducing the footprint that we'd be using because we would be using local products instead of international. So those are some of the ways that we'd be looking at stimulating economic recovery post COVID-19 pandemic. But the one thing I want to say is that regardless of what we're doing, we can't just do this in a silo. We can't just have heavy-handed approaches. We really need to be consulting with individuals and with the communities that we want to be impactful in to make sure that that whatever the solution we're proposing, it is in fact what people need, what people want, and what makes sense.